I'm Margaret Wilson, 67 years old, and I never thought my only son Bradley would betray his father and me after our 45 years of marriage. When Robert passed away, Bradley couldn't be bothered to attend the funeral. Yet 3 weeks later, he showed up at my door demanding his share of the inheritance. The look on his face when I handed him that envelope still haunts me. Family can surprise you in the worst ways, but sometimes we find strength we never knew we had. If you're watching this, please take a moment to like and subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Family betrayal can happen to anyone, and my story might help you recognize the warning signs. I spent most of my life as a schoolteacher in our small Connecticut town, teaching 3rd grade for over 30 years before retiring. Robert and I met in college and married right after graduation. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we had a comfortable life in our modest 3-bedroom house on Maple Street. The kind of place where neighbors know each other, where people still bring casseroles when someone's sick. We had saved carefully, invested wisely, and built a good life together. Bradley was our only child. We tried for more, but it wasn't in the cards for us. Maybe that's why we doted on him so much. He was a bright, curious boy with Robert's easy laugh and my stubbornness. We were so proud when he graduated from college, the first in Robert's family to get a degree. He started a career in marketing and seemed to be doing well for himself. Things changed when Bradley met Diana at a conference in Boston 6 years ago. She came from money, old money as they say. Her father owned several car dealerships across New England, and her mother Carol was the type who organized charity galas and belonged to all the right clubs. Diana was beautiful, poised, and used to getting her way. From the beginning, there was something calculated about her interest in Bradley. Robert noticed it before I did. "She looks at him like he's a project, Maggie," he told me after they'd been dating for a few months. "Not like he's the man she loves." I dismissed Robert's concerns, just happy that our son had found someone. When they got engaged after only 8 months, we hosted a small engagement party at our home. The contrast between our humble gathering and the lavish wedding her parents threw was stark. Diana's family barely acknowledged us at the wedding, treating us like distant relatives rather than the parents of the groom. After they married, we saw less and less of Bradley. Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly. Phone calls grew shorter, his excuses more frequent. When they bought a house in the same town as Diana's parents, 40 minutes from us, Bradley promised they'd visit often. They rarely did. Robert's health began declining 2 years ago. His heart had always been troublesome, a family history of coronary issues catching up with him. He took medications, watched his diet, did everything the doctors recommended, but we could tell he was getting weaker. During this time, Bradley's absence became even more noticeable. "I've invited Bradley and Diana for dinner next Sunday," I told Robert one evening as he sat in his favorite armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose as he worked through the daily crossword. "Don't get your hopes up, Maggie," he replied without looking up. "They'll find a reason not to come." But this time, to our surprise, they accepted. Robert spent the day before preparing his famous pot roast, moving slowly around the kitchen but refusing my help. "I want to make my son's favorite meal," he insisted. They arrived an hour late. Diana immediately commented on how quaint our home looked, as if she hadn't visited several times before. Bradley seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly. Robert tried engaging him in conversation about the Boston Red Sox, their shared passion since Bradley was old enough to hold a baseball, but Bradley gave only cursory responses. During dessert, apple pie I'd baked from scratch, Robert reached across the table and placed his hand over Bradley's. "I miss you, son," he said simply, his voice carrying a weight that made even Diana look up from her phone. "I'm not getting any younger, and I'd like to see more of you." Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We're just really busy, Dad. Diana's mother is planning this big anniversary party, and work is crazy right now. Plus, we're thinking about starting a family soon." At the mention of potential grandchildren, Robert's face lit up. "That's wonderful news. All the more reason for us to spend time together." Diana cleared her throat. "We should get going, Bradley. Mother's expecting my call about the party decorations." As they were leaving, Robert pressed a small package into Bradley's hands. "Early birthday present," he explained. "Open it when you get home." It was a vintage watch that had belonged to Robert's father, one of the few valuable things he owned, with both sentimental and monetary worth. Bradley thanked him absently, tucking it into his coat pocket without really looking at it. After they left, Robert sat heavily in his chair. "He's changed, Maggie. That's not our boy anymore." I tried reassuring him. "He's just busy establishing his own life. He'll come around." Robert shook his head. "No, it's more than that. That woman and her family have gotten into his head. They've convinced him he deserves more than what we gave him." I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew Robert was right. The way Bradley looked around our house now was different. Not with nostalgia or affection, but with something like embarrassment. As if his upbringing was something to overcome rather than cherish. We learned later that the watch Robert gave Bradley ended up for sale on an online auction site. Bradley hadn't even opened the card explaining its significance. When Robert saw the listing, he didn't say a word. He just closed the laptop and went to bed early. I heard him crying that night, trying to muffle the sound with his pillow. That was the last time Bradley visited while Robert was alive. Phone calls grew even more infrequent. Bradley missed Robert's 68th birthday entirely, sending only a generic text message a day later. Each disappointment seemed to age Robert more than his heart condition. "I'm setting aside some things for him," Robert told me one day as he organized his home office. "For when I'm gone. Letters mostly. Things I want him to know." "Don't talk like that," I protested. "You've got plenty of time." Robert just smiled sadly. "Time isn't the issue, Maggie. It's whether he'll care to listen, even when I'm not here to say the words myself." I didn't understand then how prophetic those words would be. It happened on a Tuesday night in April. We'd had a quiet dinner, watched a bit of television, and gone to bed around 10. I woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of Robert gasping for breath beside me, clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain. "Robert!" I scrambled to reach the phone on the nightstand, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. "Hold on, sweetheart. Just hold on." The 911 operator was calm, instructing me to give Robert an aspirin while we waited for the ambulance. Those 12 minutes felt like hours as I held his hand, watching the color drain from his face, whispering desperate reassurances. The paramedics worked efficiently, loading him onto a stretcher, attaching monitors starting in 4. One of them helped me find clothes, grab my purse, lock the house. I rode in the ambulance, watching the lights flash across Robert's pale face as they worked to stabilize him. At the hospital, they rushed him into the emergency room while a kind nurse named Stephanie guided me to a waiting area. "The doctors are doing everything they can," she assured me, pressing a foam cup of lukewarm coffee into my hands. After what seemed like an eternity, a doctor in rumpled scrubs approached. Dr. Mehta, according to his name tag. His expression told me everything before he spoke a word. "Mrs. Wilson, your husband has suffered a major cardiac event," he explained gently. "We've stabilized him temporarily, but the damage to his heart is extensive. I'm very sorry, but he doesn't have much time. Hours perhaps. We're making him comfortable, and you should come see him now." My legs nearly gave out. Stephanie caught my elbow, steadying me. "Can I call someone for you?" she asked. "My son," I managed. "I need to call my son." In a small consultation room, I dialed Bradley's number with trembling fingers. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. I called again immediately. This time he answered on the 4th ring. "Mom." His voice was loud, with music and laughter in the background. "Do you know what time it is?" "Bradley." I could barely form the words. "It's your father. He's had a heart attack. A bad one. The doctors say he doesn't have much time. You need to come to Memorial Hospital right away." There was a pause, the background noise still pulsing. "Tonight?" "Mom, I'm at Carol's birthday party. Diana's whole family is here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Bradley, your father is dying. The doctors say he has hours, maybe less. He's asking for you. Can't it wait until morning? We're in the middle of." "No, it cannot wait." My voice broke. "This is your father, Bradley. Your father who loves you more than anything in this world. Please, please come now. You might not get another chance to say goodbye." Another pause. I could hear Diana's voice in the background, asking questions. "I'll see what I can do, Mom." he finally said. But Diana drove us here, and she's been drinking, so I'd have to find another ride. And it's almost a 2-hour drive at this time of night. Take a taxi. Call an Uber. I'll pay for it, whatever it costs, I pleaded. Just come. Please. Let me talk to Diana and call you back, he said, and hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring again. When it didn't, I called back after 15 minutes. Straight to voicemail. I left a desperate message and returned to Robert's room. They had moved him to a private room. Machines beeped steadily, monitoring his failing heart. Tubes and wires connected him to various equipment. Despite all this, he looked peaceful, his breathing shallow but regular. When I took his hand, his eyes fluttered open. "Maggie," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Did you reach him?" I couldn't bear to tell him the truth. "Yes, sweetheart. Bradley's on his way." Relief washed over his face. "Good. That's good. I need to see my boy." For the next 3 hours I sat by Robert's bedside, holding his hand, reminiscing about our life together, our early days, our travels the day Bradley was born. Every few minutes Robert would ask, "Is he here yet?" And I would check my phone, finding no messages, and tell another lie. "He's on his way, stuck in traffic," or "the nurse said he just called from the road." As dawn broke, Robert's breathing became more labored. Dr. Mehta returned, checked the monitors, and gave me a solemn look. I stepped into the hallway with him. "It won't be long now, Mrs. Wilson," he said quietly. "If there's anyone else you want to call." I tried Bradley again. Voicemail. I left one final message, my voice breaking. "Bradley, please. Your father doesn't have much time left. Please come now." When I returned to the room, Robert was agitated, trying to sit up despite his weakness. "Where's Bradley?" he asked, more insistent now. "I need to talk to my son." I couldn't lie anymore. "He's trying to get here, Robert. He really is." Robert seemed to understand what I wasn't saying. A tear slipped down his cheek. "He's not coming, is he?" I couldn't answer, my own tears falling freely now. "It's okay, Maggie," he whispered, squeezing my hand weakly. "Not your fault. Tell him I love him anyway. And that I understand. More than he knows." Those were the last coherent words Robert spoke. Within the hour, as the morning sun streamed through the window, he took his final breath. I was holding his hand, telling him how much I loved him, as he slipped away. Bradley never called back. My son didn't come to say goodbye to his father. And as I sat there in that quiet hospital room, something inside me hardened. Something that would never quite be the same again. The days following Robert's death passed in a blur. There were arrangements to make, people to notify, paperwork to complete. Our friend Thomas, who owned the local funeral home, guided me through the process with gentle efficiency. I chose a simple oak casket. Robert had always admired fine woodwork, and selected his navy suit, the one he'd worn to our 40th anniversary dinner. All the while, I kept expecting to hear from Bradley. Surely, I thought, once the initial shock had passed, he would call. He would apologize for missing his father's final moments. He would help me plan the service. He would step up as the man his father had raised him to be. My phone remained painfully silent until the day after I had finalized the funeral arrangements. Then a text message. "Sorry about Dad. Been crazy busy here. When's the funeral?"
No condolences.
No explanation for his absence. No offer to help. Just a request for information, as if asking about a distant acquaintance's retirement party. I responded with the details. Thursday at 2 o'clock, Lakeside Presbyterian, the church where we'd baptized Bradley 39 years earlier. His reply came hours later. "Can't make Thursday. Prior commitments with Diana's family. Sorry." I read those words so many times, trying to make sense of them. What commitment could possibly take precedence over his father's funeral? I called him immediately. Straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice trembling not with sadness but with anger now. "Bradley, this is your father's funeral. The man who raised you, who loved you unconditionally. Whatever your commitment is, cancel it. Be here to say goodbye to your dad." He didn't call back. Instead, another text. "Really can't get out of it. Diana's family business thing. Send pictures." send pictures of his father's funeral, as if it were a birthday party he was missing. I showed the message to my sister Nancy, who had flown in from Arizona to support me. That little. She didn't finish the sentence, just pulled me into a fierce hug. You focus on giving Robert a beautiful goodbye, Maggie. I'll handle Bradley if he shows his face. The morning of the funeral dawned clear and cool, the kind of spring day Robert had loved. The church filled quickly. Robert had been well liked in our community. His former colleagues from the accounting firm where he'd worked for 30 years. Our neighbors. Friends from the golf club and his volunteer work at the Veterans Center. Even some of my former students, now adults with children of their own. I saved a seat in the front row right next to me, just in case. The service was everything Robert would have wanted. Simple, dignified, with his favorite hymns and thoughtful words from our pastor. Thomas had created a beautiful photo display in the foyer. Robert as a young man, our wedding day, Bradley's birth, family vacations, holidays, the ordinary moments that make up a life well lived. During the eulogy, I found myself scanning the back of the church, hoping to see Bradley slipping in late. The seat beside me remained empty. After the service, people lined up to offer condolences. So many mentioned Bradley, their expressions shifting from sympathy to awkward concern when they realized he wasn't there. Bradley couldn't make it today. I found myself saying over and over, work commitment. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but it was easier than explaining that my son had chosen his mother-in-law's birthday celebration over his father's funeral. Robert was so proud of that boy, said George, Robert's best friend since college, always talking about him, showing pictures of him to anyone who'd look. I know, I replied, the simplicity of those two words hiding the complexity of emotions behind them. The procession to the cemetery was long, nearly 30 cars following the hearse along tree-lined streets to the quiet hillside where Robert would rest. As they lowered his casket into the ground, I placed a single white rose on top, whispering a private goodbye to my husband of 45 years. No one else placed a rose for Robert from his son. The reception afterward was held at our home, organized by the church ladies who had known us for decades. People brought food, shared stories about Robert, offered to help with whatever I needed. Their kindness was overwhelming, making Bradley's absence all the more conspicuous. "Where's that boy of yours?" asked Eleanor, who had lived next door since Bradley was in diapers. "I brought his favorite lemon squares." "He couldn't make it," I said, the explanation wearing thinner each time. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. She'd known us too long to be fooled. "Well, that's a shame. His father never missed a single one of his baseball games, you know. Not one. Even drove 3 hours after work to see that championship game when Bradley was 16. I remembered that game. Robert had closed an important account at work, then driven through a thunderstorm to reach the field by the 7th inning. Bradley had hit a double that helped win the game. The photo of them together afterward, Bradley still in his dirty uniform, Robert's arm around his shoulders, had sat on our mantel for years. As evening fell and the last guests departed, Nancy helped me clean up. The house felt cavernous without Robert's presence, without his deep laugh or the familiar sound of his footsteps. "You should come stay with me in Arizona for a while," Nancy suggested as we washed dishes side by side. "Get away from here, give yourself space to grieve." I shook my head. "Not yet. There are things I need to do here first." That night, alone in the bed I'd shared with Robert for nearly half a century, I cried until there were no tears left. Not just for my husband but for my son, the boy he had been, and the man he had failed to become. Bradley still hadn't called. The first morning I woke up alone in our house, the silence was deafening. For decades, I'd started each day to the sounds of Robert. The coffee maker gurgling because he always got up first, the rustle of newspaper pages, his off-key humming as he moved around the kitchen. Now there was nothing but the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Robert's parents. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how to navigate this strange new reality where I was no longer half of Robert and Margaret, but just Margaret alone. Widow. The word felt foreign, ill-fitting, like a coat several sizes too large. Nancy had extended her stay for a few days after the funeral, but eventually had to return to her own life, her own family. My best friend Elizabeth brought casseroles and checked in daily, but she couldn't fill the yawning emptiness of the house. I found myself talking to Robert as if he were still there, telling him about my day, asking questions that would never be answered. A week passed. Then another. Bradley didn't call. I considered reaching out to him again but found myself hesitating, the wound of his absence at the funeral still too raw. Instead, I began the process of sorting through Robert's belongings, not to remove him from the house, but to feel closer to him, to understand parts of his life I might have overlooked. His closet still smelled like his aftershave. His reading glasses sat on his nightstand beside a half-finished mystery novel, a bookmark holding his place in a story he would never finish. In his home office, I found a leather-bound journal I hadn't known he kept. Opening it felt like an invasion of privacy at first, but as I began to read, I realized it was a gift. Robert's thoughts, his worries, his hopes, preserved in his precise handwriting. Many entries were about Bradley. The pride when he graduated college, the concern when he started dating Diana, the hurt when he began pulling away. The last entry was dated just 2 weeks before his death. Bradley didn't call again today. His birthday gift to me was 3 days late. A gift card to a restaurant chain, probably Diana's idea. Not even signed. I worry about him. Not about his success, he seems to be doing fine there, but about his heart. He's losing himself, becoming someone I don't recognize. Someone who values the wrong things. Maggie keeps hoping he'll come around, but I'm beginning to accept that he may not, at least not while I'm alive to see it. I suspect he'll return when there's something to gain. I've made arrangements with Edward, our lawyer, to prepare for that possibility. Not to punish Bradley, but because money is the last thing he needs more of in his life. What he needs is perspective, and perhaps losing something he expects will provide that. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. Robert had anticipated this, Bradley's absence, his eventual return with his hand out. He had seen what I had refused to acknowledge. Our son had changed fundamentally, and not for the better. The next day I called Edward Matthews, who had been our lawyer for decades and was also a close friend. We met for coffee at a small cafe downtown, away from the well-meaning but exhausting sympathy I encountered everywhere else in our small town. Robert came to see me about 3 months ago, Edward explained, pulling out a folder. He wanted to make some changes to his will. He was very specific about his wishes. I listened as Edward outlined the provisions. Our modest estate, the house, Robert's life insurance, our savings and investments, was structured differently than I had expected. Most would come to me, as I'd anticipated. A small trust was established for any future grandchildren's education. Several charitable donations were specified, particularly to the Veterans Center where Robert had volunteered. And Bradley? Robert had left him a small cash bequest, enough to be meaningful but far less than the equal share he might have expected, along with a personal letter Edward now handed to me in a sealed envelope. Robert asked that this be given to Bradley only if he came asking about the inheritance, Edward explained. He was concerned about Bradley's motivations. He was right to be, I said quietly, taking the envelope. Bradley couldn't even attend his father's funeral. Couldn't be bothered to say goodbye. Edward's expression softened with sympathy. Robert loved that boy fiercely, Margaret. This wasn't about punishment. He told me he hoped it would be a wake-up call. I nodded, understanding completely. It was exactly like Robert, even in death, trying to guide our son back to the values we had tried to instill in him. As the weeks passed, I developed a new routine. Mornings with coffee on the porch swing, watching the neighborhood come alive. Afternoons volunteering at the library or having lunch with Elizabeth. Evenings were hardest. The long, quiet hours when Robert's absence felt most acute. I joined a grief support group at the church, finding unexpected comfort in the company of others navigating similar losses. I started visiting the charities Robert had supported, learning more about their work, seeing firsthand the impact of his generosity. At the Veterans Center, I met men who had served with Robert's father in Korea, who told stories I'd never heard about my father-in-law's bravery. I began volunteering there myself, finding purpose in continuing Robert's legacy. Through it all, Bradley's silence continued. No calls, no texts, not even an email asking how I was coping. I heard from our few mutual acquaintances that he and Diana had taken a vacation to the Bahamas shortly after the funeral. A trip paid for by her parents as a birthday gift to Diana's mother. The knowledge settled like a stone in my stomach. 3 weeks after Robert's death, I was in the garden he had lovingly tended, trying to remember which perennials needed dividing this season, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. A sleek black BMW, Bradley's car, the one he'd proudly shown off at Christmas, explaining in detail the finance terms he'd negotiated. I straightened up, brushing dirt from my gardening gloves, watching as my son stepped out of the car. He was wearing designer sunglasses and a polo shirt I didn't recognize, looking more like Diana's family than the boy Robert and I had raised. For a moment I considered going inside, making him knock, wait, perhaps even wonder if I would see him at all. Instead, I stood my ground among Robert's beloved flowers and waited for my son to approach. Bradley walked up the familiar stone path to where I stood, his posture stiff, his expression carefully composed. He looked like a man preparing for a business meeting rather than a son visiting his recently widowed mother. "Mom," he said, removing his sunglasses and leaning in for a brief perfunctory hug. His cologne was overwhelming, nothing like the subtle scent Robert had preferred. "The garden looks good. Your father planted these hydrangeas last fall," I replied, gesturing to the bushes beginning to form buds. He was looking forward to seeing them bloom this summer. Bradley glanced at the plants without real interest. "How are you holding up?" he asked, in the tone of someone checking a necessary box of politeness. "I'm managing," I said simply. "Would you like to come inside?" He followed me into the house, his eyes scanning the living room as if taking inventory. Had he always looked at our home this way, and I'd been too blind to notice? "Can I get you something to drink?" I offered, falling into the hostess habits of a lifetime. "Just water is fine. Thanks." He settled into Robert's favorite armchair without hesitation, placing his phone on the side table. "The place looks the same." I brought him water in the crystal glass his father had always used for special occasions. "What brings you by, Bradley? It's been nearly a month since your father passed." He had the grace to look slightly abashed, though it passed quickly. "I've been meaning to come. Things have been hectic with work, and Diana's family needed help with some business matters." He took a sip of water. "I wanted to check on you, see how you're doing." "I'm grieving," I said plainly. "Your father was my partner for 45 years. Bradley nodded, his expression appropriately solemn, though his eyes kept drifting to the cabinet where Robert had kept his collection of antique watches, the ones that remained after Bradley had sold the heirloom. "I know it's difficult," he said. "Diana thought perhaps you might want to consider downsizing. This place must feel awfully big for just one person." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. "I've lived here for 38 years, Bradley. Your father and I built this life together. I'm not ready to downsize less than a month after burying him." Of course, he backpedaled quickly. "Just something to think about for the future. No rush." An uncomfortable silence fell between us. I waited, somehow knowing there was more to this visit than concern for my well-being. "Actually," he finally continued, setting down his glass, "I also wanted to discuss some financial matters. I know this might not be the best time, but Diana and I are looking at investment opportunities, and I thought it would be good to get a clear picture of the estate situation." There it was, the real reason for his visit. "The estate situation," I repeated flatly. "Yes. Dad's will, insurance, that sort of thing." He attempted a sympathetic expression. "I know it's not pleasant to think about, but it's important to get these matters settled." "I've met with Edward," I said. "He's handling everything according to your father's wishes." Bradley leaned forward slightly. "Great. And what were those wishes exactly? I mean, I assume as his only child, I'm taken care of." I studied my son's face. Robert's straight nose, my chin, but something unfamiliar in his eyes. Something calculating. "Why weren't you at the funeral, Bradley?" I asked instead of answering his question. He blinked, clearly thrown by the change in subject. "I told you, Mom. We had that commitment with Diana's family. Her mother's birthday celebration had been planned for months. We couldn't get out of it. Your father was being buried." I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath. The man who taught you to ride a bike, who attended every school play, who worked 2 jobs to pay for your college. And you couldn't miss a birthday party? It wasn't just a party, Bradley protested, color rising in his cheeks. It was an important networking event for Diana's father's business. Several potential investors were there. My career opportunities were at stake. And your father's funeral wasn't important enough to take precedence? Mom, please. I'm trying to have a practical conversation here. Yes, I feel terrible about missing the funeral. I should have been there. But what's done is done, and now we need to look forward. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. Looking forward. To your inheritance. He had the decency to look uncomfortable for a moment. Well, yes. I need to know what to expect. For planning purposes. Planning purposes, I echoed. Bradley's patience was clearly wearing thin. Mom, stop repeating everything I say. Dad and I may have had our differences, but I'm still his only child. I just need to know about my 50% of the inheritance. That's standard, right? Half to the spouse, half to the child. There it was. The naked truth of why my son had finally found time to visit his grieving mother. Is that why you came here today, Bradley? For your 50%? Not entirely, he said defensively. But yes, I need to know. Diana and I are considering buying a vacation property in the Hamptons. Her parents know a place that's coming on the market, but we need to move quickly. So the timing of accessing my inheritance is important. A vacation home. While I was still learning how to sleep in an empty bed. I see, I said quietly. Bradley misinterpreted my quietness as acquiescence. So, do you know the figures? What am I looking at here? Dad was always private about finances, but I assume between the house, his retirement accounts and insurance it's substantial. I rose from my seat. Wait here a moment, Bradley. I went to Robert's office, unlocked the desk drawer where I'd placed the envelope from Edward, and returned to the living room. My son straightened up, eyes brightening with interest. Your father prepared something for you, I said, holding the envelope, for this exact moment. Bradley's eyes fixed on the envelope in my hands, his expression shifting from barely concealed impatience to eager anticipation. He reached for it, but I held it back for a moment. Before I give you this, I said carefully, I want you to answer one question honestly. Did you even grieve your father's passing at all? Bradley sighed, running a hand through his expertly styled hair. Mom, of course I did. He was my dad. But life goes on, right? That's what he would have wanted. Is it? I asked softly. Is that really what the father you knew would have wanted? For you to miss his funeral for a party? To come here 3 weeks later asking about money? His expression hardened. I'm not going to sit here and be guilt-tripped. People grieve differently. I chose to honor Dad by continuing to build my future, the future he helped make possible. I studied my son's face, the defensive set of his jaw, the way his eyes couldn't quite meet mine. This was Robert's child, the baby we had cradled, the boy we had raised, now a stranger to me. This is why you came, isn't it? I finally said, extending the envelope. Bradley took it eagerly, his fingers immediately working to break the seal. Thanks, Mom. I appreciate you not dragging this out. Once we know the numbers, we can talk about timeline for liquidating assets if needed. The casual way he discussed dismantling the life his father had built made my heart ache. I remained standing as he pulled out the contents, not the check or account statements he clearly expected, but a handwritten letter on Robert's personal stationery. His brow furrowed in confusion. What's this? Where are the documents? Read it, I said simply, lowering myself back into my chair. Bradley unfolded the letter, his expression changing from confusion to disbelief as he began to read his father's words. Dear Bradley, if you're reading this, then I've passed on, and you've come to ask about your inheritance. I want you to know that I love you, son. I always have and always will, even as I've watched you change into someone I struggle to recognize. The greatest inheritance a father can give his child isn't money or property, but values, integrity, compassion, gratitude, and the knowledge of what truly matters in life. Somewhere along the way, I fear you've lost sight of these things. While your mother will receive the majority of what we've built together, I have set aside a sum of $10,000 for you. This is not the equal share you likely expected. The remainder of what would have been your portion will go to the Veterans Center where I volunteered and 3 other charities that help people who understand the value of what they receive. This decision wasn't made to punish you, but with the hope that it might help you reflect on what's truly important. Money and status have become too central in your life, too defining of your choices. They won't bring you happiness, son. I learned that through living, and I hope you don't learn it through losing. If you're angry reading this, I understand, but know that this comes from love, not malice. The man you've become needs perspective more than he needs money. Your mother had no part in this decision. Direct any anger at me, not her. She loves you unconditionally, as do I. With eternal love. Dad. The color drained from Bradley's face as he read, then returned in a flush of anger. His hands began to shake, crinkling the paper. This is a joke, right? He demanded, his voice rising. $10,000? After everything? The house alone must be worth over $400,000. It's not a joke, I said calmly. Those were your father's wishes. Bradley shot to his feet, the letter clutched in his fist. This isn't legal. He can't do this. I'm his son, his only child. I have rights. Edward assures me the will is perfectly legal, I replied, maintaining my composure despite my racing heart. Your father had every right to distribute his assets as he saw fit. You put him up to this, Bradley accused, his face contorting with rage. You turned him against me. The unfairness of the accusation stung like a physical blow. I did no such thing. Your father made this decision on his own. In fact, I only learned about it after he died. I don't believe you, he spat. You were always passive-aggressive about Diana, about her family. You were jealous that I found a better life than the middle-class mediocrity you and Dad settled for. Each word felt like a slap, but I refused to let him see how deeply he'd wounded me. Is that what you think of the life your father and I built? Mediocrity? I asked quietly. We gave you everything we could. We loved you unconditionally. We supported every dream you had. And now you're punishing me because I outgrew this. He gestured dismissively around our home. Because I wanted more than this limited existence. No one is punishing you, Bradley, I said, rising to face him. Your father simply recognized what you value most. And it isn't family. I'll contest this, he threatened, waving the crumpled letter. I'll get a lawyer. I'll fight it all the way. That's your right, I acknowledged. But before you do, ask yourself if that's really how you want to honor your father's memory. By fighting over his money. Something in my words seemed to penetrate his anger. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. Then his expression hardened again. Diana was right about you both, he said coldly. Small-minded people who never understood ambition. I thought of Robert working 60-hour weeks when Bradley was young so we could afford the baseball camps and art classes he loved. I thought of the vacations we never took so we could save for his college fund. The retirement Robert had delayed to help Bradley with the down payment on his first condo. Your father understood ambition perfectly well, I said. He simply believed in being ambitious about the right things. Like being a good father, a good husband, a good man. Bradley scoffed, but I could see my words had hit a nerve. He stuffed the letter into his pocket and picked up his phone. This isn't over. It doesn't have to be, I said, feeling suddenly tired beyond measure. The door is always open for my son. Not for someone demanding money, but for the boy your father and I raised. If he ever returns, I'll be here. Don't hold your breath, Bradley sneered, striding toward the door. Enjoy this house while you can. When I'm done contesting the will, you'll be lucky to keep half of it. I followed him to the door, maintaining my dignity despite the pain tearing through me. As he reached for the handle, his wedding ring caught the light. The ring Robert had helped him select, had even contributed to when Bradley complained about the cost. Your father loved you until his last breath, I said softly. He asked for you. Bradley froze for a moment, his back to me, shoulders suddenly rigid. For one hopeful heartbeat, I thought he might turn around, might let the armor crack. Instead, he yanked the door open. I'll have my lawyer contact you, he said without looking back, and stormed down the path to his car. I stood in the doorway watching as my only child drove away, leaving nothing but dust and painful truths in his wake. The letter had done exactly what Robert had intended, revealed Bradley's true priorities. I just wasn't sure if the revelation would lead to the reflection Robert had hoped for, or simply harden the man our son had become. Either way, something fundamental had shifted. As I closed the door, I felt a strange mixture of heartbreak and liberation. For the first time, I saw Bradley clearly, without the veil of maternal hope obscuring the reality. And in that clarity, painful as it was, I found an unexpected strength. The strength to love him without excuses, without denial, and without sacrificing my own dignity in the process. The days following Bradley's explosive visit were eerily quiet. I half expected legal letters to arrive, or angry phone calls from Diana, but none came. Perhaps they had consulted a lawyer who confirmed what Edward had told me. Robert's will was legal and binding. Perhaps Bradley had actually read his father's letter a second time, absorbed its message beyond his initial reaction. Or perhaps they had simply moved on, deciding the amount wasn't worth the fight. Whatever the reason, the silence gave me space to breathe, to grieve, and gradually to heal. With spring turning to summer, I found solace in Robert's garden. The hydrangeas he had planted bloomed magnificently, their blue flowers reminding me of the dress I'd worn on our first date. I spent hours tending the plants, feeling closer to him with my hands in the soil he had loved. Nancy called weekly, still trying to convince me to visit Arizona. The desert has a way of clarifying things, she insisted. And my guest room has a view of the mountains. I promised to consider it for the fall, when the first anniversary of Robert's death would make staying in our house particularly difficult. But for now, I needed to be here, surrounded by the life we had built, finding my footing as just Margaret instead of one half of Robert and Margaret. The Veterans Center became my second home. I started small, organizing donations and helping with paperwork, but soon found myself more deeply involved. Many of the men there had known Robert, and sharing stories about him kept his memory alive in ways that brought comfort rather than pain. By midsummer, I was coordinating a new program teaching computer skills to older veterans, using the teaching experience from my years in the classroom. Elizabeth convinced me to join her book club, introducing me to women I might have known casually for years but never truly connected with. We read everything from mysteries to memoirs, and I found my world expanding in ways it hadn't since Robert's illness had narrowed our focus. "You're different," Elizabeth remarked one evening as we lingered over coffee after the others had left. "Stronger somehow." "Necessity," I replied with a small smile. "I didn't have much choice." "That's not it," she insisted. "Plenty of people crumble under necessity. You're standing taller." Perhaps she was right. Without Robert's steadying presence, I'd been forced to find my own balance. And without the energy spent trying to maintain Bradley's place in our lives, making excuses for him, pretending his absence didn't hurt, I had more strength for genuine connections. In August, I received a text message from Bradley, the first contact since his visit. "Diana and I bought the Hamptons house. Her parents helped with financing. Closing next week." No question about how I was doing. No acknowledgement of our last interaction. Just an announcement that he had obtained the very thing he'd hoped his inheritance would help purchase. I wasn't sure if it was meant as an olive branch or a statement that he didn't need what Robert had withheld. Either way, it felt incomplete. I responded simply, "Congratulations. I hope it brings you joy." He didn't reply. As fall approached, I made a decision that surprised even me. With Nancy's encouragement, I listed the house for sale. Not because Bradley had suggested it, or because it felt too empty, but because I was ready for something new. Something that was just mine. The real estate market was strong, and the house sold within weeks to a young family with 2 small children. Watching them explore the backyard during the final walkthrough, the little boy immediately climbing the oak tree where Bradley's childhood swing had hung, felt right somehow. This house deserved to be filled with new laughter, new memories. I found a charming cottage near the lake, just big enough for me but with a spare room for when Nancy visited. Moving was bittersweet, sorting through 45 years of accumulated life, deciding what to keep, what to give away, what to let go. I kept Robert's journals, his favorite books, the watch he wore daily. I donated his clothes to the Veterans Center, knowing he would approve. The money from the house sale, combined with Robert's life insurance and our savings, meant I was more than comfortable financially. I established a scholarship at the local community college in Robert's name for students pursuing accounting, his profession. I increased my donations to the charities he had valued. And yes, I set aside a fund for any future grandchildren, should they ever exist, honoring Robert's provision in his will. In October, almost 6 months after Bradley's visit, I received a letter, an actual paper letter, not a text or email, postmarked from the town where he and Diana lived. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, unsure what to expect. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Bradley's familiar handwriting covering both sides. Dear Mom, I've started and torn up this letter at least a dozen times over the past few months. Pride kept getting in the way. But something Dad always said keeps coming back to me. It takes a strong man to admit when he's wrong. I guess I'm trying to be strong now. I was wrong. About so many things. How I treated Dad in his final years. Missing his funeral. How I spoke to you that day in the living room. Diana and I have separated. It's been a long time coming, though I was too stubborn to see it. The house in the Hamptons was the final straw. A financial stretch we couldn't afford, but her parents insisted was necessary to maintain appearances. I finally realized I was living someone else's life, chasing someone else's definition of success. I found Dad's watch. The one he gave me that last dinner at your house. I never even opened the box until last week. The note inside said it was Grandpa's, worn through the war in every important day of Dad's life. He wanted me to have it for my important days. I've been wearing it daily, trying to find my way back to the person I was before I lost sight of what matters. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that Dad's letter eventually did what he hoped. It made me think. It made me remember. I'd like to come see you sometime if you're willing. Not to discuss money or the will or any of that. Just to talk. To listen, really. I've done too little of that. Love, Bradley. I read the letter 3 times, tears flowing freely by the 3rd reading. It wasn't a complete transformation. It wasn't a promise that everything would be perfect going forward. But it was a start. An acknowledgement. A crack in the wall of pride and materialism that had separated us. I called him that evening. The conversation was awkward, halting, neither of us quite sure how to bridge the chasm that had formed. But we made plans for him to visit the following weekend. A first step on a long road back to each other. As I prepared for Bradley's visit, arranging the guest room in my new cottage, placing fresh flowers on the nightstand, I felt Robert's presence more strongly than I had since his death. Not in a supernatural way, but in the certainty that he had known what he was doing with that letter. He had seen a path for our son when both Bradley and I were blind to it. I've learned so much in this year of grief and growth. That strength often emerges when we have no other choice. That forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, but about creating space for a different future. That love, real love, sometimes means standing firm rather than giving in. Most importantly, I've learned that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by who shows up when it matters, by who stays when it's difficult, by who returns when they've lost their way. If you're watching this and struggling with family disappointment or betrayal, know that healing is possible, though it rarely follows the path we expect. Set boundaries with love. Forgive when you can, but don't confuse forgiveness with accepting mistreatment. And remember that it's never too late to rebuild what's broken if both sides are willing to lay new foundations. I don't know what will happen when Bradley visits, whether we can truly repair what's been damaged, whether he can sustain this moment of clarity or will drift back to old patterns. But I know I'll face it with the strength Robert helped me find. In myself, in our love, in the life we built together. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to hear about your experiences with family reconciliation in the comments below. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with loved ones? Were you able to rebuild those relationships? Please like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in navigating complicated family dynamics. Remember, the strongest families aren't those without cracks, but those who learn to grow through them.